Tony Shields, Rob Ellis. We are Sports Take. We are joined right now by a phenomenal columnist from the Philadelphia Inquirer. He's also a great author as well. If you have not picked up The Rise, do yourself a favor, pick it up. He's also an excellent talk show host on 94 WIP on Saturday mornings with Glenn Macnow at 10 a.m. Mike Sielski. Mike, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
You left out my charm and good looks, Rob.
And you wrote it perfectly for me, Mike. I just didn't follow the script, man. And
That's
all around good guy. Yes, you got
it. Guy, yes.
You got it all covered, Mike.
Shout out to anyone who understands that reference.
Yes. It rhymes with Polly. Yes. All right.
Full disclosure, that one went over my head, you guys.
Yeah.
You're a youngin', Tone. You're a youngin'. You don't remember the great Don Tollefson.
Yeah, I'm going to put the walker away, and now we'll get to business. Mike, I loved your piece 2 days ago. Actually, no, it was yesterday. This whole thing is a blur this week. I apologize. But
darn right.
Game, yeah, and the old saying used to be the only one. Tone, this is another old man saying. Get ready. The only person who can contain Michael Jordan was Dean Smith. Right. That's what they used to say when Michael Jordan was in college. And basically Mike wrote a piece. It hit a lot of different things, but Hassan Reddick, the only person who can contain Hassan Reddick is Matt Patricia. So Mike, let's start there because there's so much to dive into, but at the time it felt panicky. In hindsight, it looks worse. The defense took a major step backwards. Not that it was the 85 Bears anyway under Desai. But should we at the time, and that was right before the Seattle game, have said, oh my God, this thing is so far off the rails?
Yes, we should have. And no, I didn't. I didn't think it was a huge panic move at the time, Rob, only because the defense had gotten its doors blown off against the 49ers and the Cowboys.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, these are the teams that they're going to have to face and beat in the playoffs to have any hope of getting back to the Super Bowl. And I think I probably got caught up in the same thing I suspect the Eagles got caught up in, which is, okay, don't worry about the Seahawks. Don't worry about the Giants twice. Don't worry about the Cardinals. This is a move for the postseason. And we have seen that their defense is not good enough to get them there in the postseason. So I wasn't opposed at the time to saying, okay, if they think Matt Patricia can upgrade this defense, okay, I'll see how this goes. Now, I was skeptical that Patricia was the guy to remedy whatever was wrong with the defense. But replacing Sean Desai at the time didn't leave me to go, oh my God, this thing is off the rails. And everyone in retrospect should have been looking at it that way.
Well, let me stay on that real quick, Tone. I'm sorry.
No problem.
For people who didn't read your story, Mike, and you absolutely should if you haven't, what was the impression that you got from Reddick? Just after, I know it was very sort of raw at the time, but where he was with the way things went for him and for the team.
I got the impression that Hassan Reddick, after that game Monday night against the Buccaneers, was holding his tongue from saying what he really wanted to say about the defensive shift. Mm-hmm. Think about this, Rob. Hassan Reddick had 11 sacks over a 10-game stretch in the middle of the season. Remember, at the beginning of the year, he was playing with that broken thumb, okay? And he had no sacks for his first 3 games. Then he rips off 11 in 10 games. Then Sean Desai is demoted. Matt Patricia is promoted. And Hassan Reddick starts dropping back into coverage more often than he ever has at any point in his career. Even during the time when he was an inside linebacker with the Arizona Cardinals and his career was in the balance. And it was only when the Cardinals moved him to outside linebacker and turned him into a pass rusher that he became a great player. Over the 5 games that Matt Patricia ran the defense for the Eagles, Hassan Reddick did not register a quarterback sack. He did not register a quarterback hit in 4 of those 5 games. And he did not register a single pass defended. It's as if the Eagles took Hassan Reddick and just traded him away for the last 5 weeks of the season, and he was your best defensive player.
Jeez.
So you tell me what you think Hassan Reddick was thinking in the aftermath of that game.
Malpractice. That's what he was thinking. Sorry.
Darn right.
Go ahead.
But, it's funny because here's the thing. When you really think about it, Sean Desai was never hired in good faith in the first place. You hired him, and all of a sudden you bring in Matt Patricia to follow him right behind him, and now automatically a guy that high profile, you're going to look over your shoulder naturally. And lo and behold, we get to this point in the season where they demote Sean Desai, they promote Matt Patricia, and we have to ask ourselves this question because I'm not sure if too many people are talking about it. do we have to consider that the Philadelphia Eagles completely derailed their own football season from the beginning, and it just took us until about week 11, week 12 to realize it?
Oh, I think there's something to that, Tone, very much. And there's a name that we haven't mentioned yet, but I think we need to bring to the forefront a little bit and what we're talking about, which is Howie Roseman.
Yep.
Okay. There's so much that we haven't confirmed yet, but there are clues leading us to certain conclusions about what happened and why this season. The connection between Howie Roseman and the Eagles and the Patriots. Nick Sirianni didn't know Matt Patricia before Matt Patricia was hired to be a senior defensive assistant. That seems to have the fingerprints of Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie all over it. The decision to demote Desai and promote Patricia, Sirianni has said it was his decision, but that's something that's right out of the mold of what the Eagles have done in the past. Yep. With the shifting of assistant coaches and the move on Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman's part to tell a head coach, hey, you need to hire this guy or you need to demote this guy. Remember, that was why Doug Peterson, one of the reasons Doug Peterson left and was fired, was that he wanted certain guys as assistant coaches and Howie and Jeffrey didn't want them. So we don't know yet exactly and officially why certain moves were made, but it fits a pattern that the Eagles have kind of unfurled for a long time now. And I think that's a question people have to ask. How many of these decisions were Nick Sirianni's ultimately, and how many of them were made above him?
Mike, I'll just tell you personally, I don't believe for a second that Nick Sirianni acted alone to make this move on the defensive side. I feel the same way. Like he took the bullet for A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts with that pass in Seattle. I feel the same way about this. I think he just took the bullet for it. It was me. It was my call, whatever. Because I don't think that happens without Jeffrey Lurie and Howie not only signing off. I think it was probably initiated or much more agreed upon from them than him. But that's just,
well, you know what, Rob? It's funny you say that because now we have to ask ourselves, because Sirianni, he's been on the chopping block for the past several weeks. We have to ask ourselves this, Mike, right? If he's not making these decisions, what grounds are there to fire him? If he's not making any of the decisions, that's something we have to consider as well.
The grounds are he is charged with making the system work. The system being what Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman want. And if he can't make it work, then they need to get somebody else in. Tone, I have maintained, and I'm going to keep pounding this drum until people listen to me. The connection between the real decision makers at the top of the Eagles organization, Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman, and whoever their head coach might be, is less important than the perceived improvement of the quarterback that they have picked to be their franchise quarterback. Okay. Go back to Andy Reid. As long as Donovan McNabb was in place, Andy Reid was totally secure in his job as the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. Okay. Andy Reid lasted 3 years after Donovan McNabb was traded. Chip Kelly lasted less than 3 years as head coach, with Michael Vick getting injured, with Nick Foles playing well for a season, playing less good for the second season, then getting injured, and with Mark Sanchez and Sam Bradford as his quarterbacks. Then they bring in Carson Wentz, they hire Doug Peterson, and Doug is fine there, even wins a Super Bowl there, as long as the perception is that the quarterback situation is settled and Carson Wentz is on the upswing. And look, there were a lot of factors that went into why Doug is no longer the head coach with the Eagles, but one of the primary ones is that Carson Wentz bottomed out in 2020 and was terrible. And what happened at the end of that season? They fired Doug Peterson before they traded Carson Wentz. Only did they move on from Carson Wentz they only moved on from him when it became clear he didn't want to be there anymore. And now we have a similar situation. Jalen Hurts took a step backward last year. And whether you put the blame for that on Hurts or Sirianni or Brian Johnson or whatever, if Jeffrey and Howie perceive that Nick Sirianni isn't extracting every last bit of greatness that they think he should be extracting from Jalen Hurts, they're probably going to find another head coach.
Yeah, and Mike, let's stay on that. I mean, I don't know how you conclude, we know how worked up we can get locally. We know when you're in the eye of the storm, sometimes there's reaction, whether it's fans, whether it's media, whatever, it could be everybody. And sometimes those reactions are extreme and over the top, and, then they're grounded in emotion rather than rational thinking. But in this case, there's a huge but here. In this case, I mean, you're hearing it. You heard it from Troy Aikman for 3 hours of a game on Monday night, repeatedly. You've heard it from Louis Riddick. You've heard it from Ray Lewis. You've heard it from Brian Baldinger with tape breakdowns, not even just opinion. It's like, look at what I'm seeing here. This is total, again, malpractice. I don't know how Nick defends himself with this stuff. They look horrendously prepared and horrendously coached on game day. And he's the head coach at the end of the day. Like, we could say, oh, Brian Johnson doesn't know how to call a game. Maybe. But if he is truly the game planner, the schemer of this, he's not scheming them up to be prepared, and he has no idea how to fix it in game. I don't know I don't know what the defense is, and I'm not a knee-jerk guy. Like, I'm normally, dude, this guy just got to a Super Bowl. We're firing him the next year. But in this case, this is unbelievable. It's almost indefensible.
So 2 things with that, Rob. First of all, I think you're right to point out how much the national conversation factors or will factor into Jeffrey Lurie's thinking. That matters. It matters to him that the Eagles are perceived to be a crown jewel franchise, that they are perceived to be one of the gold standard franchises, to use a phrase from 30 years ago, that the NFL has. So the fact that Aikman and Louis Riddick and Ray Lewis and all the national talking heads and analysts are picking the Eagles apart will matter to Jeffrey, I think. The second thing is in terms of Sirianni's future, this to me is the most interesting question about it. Look at the array of coaches that are available to be hired if you have a vacancy right now. You have Bill Belichick, you have Jim Harbaugh, you have Pete Carroll, you have Mike Vrabel, and those are the big 4 really off the top, okay? Now, here's the conundrum to me for Jeffrey Lurie. If you decide you are moving on from Nick Sirianni, are you going to go get one of those 4? And if you go get one of those 4, none of whom are a go-along to get along kind of head coach. No. Any one of whom, if you bring him in, is going to want to do things his way. What does that mean for Howie Roseman? Is Jeffrey really going to make that leap to say, if I bring in Bill Belichick, or I bring in Pete Carroll, or Jim Harbaugh, or even Mike Vrabel, am I going to tell Howie, sorry, you got to take another back seat? That's one question. Mm-hmm. The other question is, if you don't hire one of those guys and you fire Sirianni, who are you getting? And how are you going to answer for the fact that you had an opportunity to hire one of these big 4 guys and you didn't do it? Mm-hmm. And then you could add a third dimension too. If he goes to Sirianni and says, all right, Nick, if you want to remain the head coach, you've got to do X, Y, and Z. You got to fire this guy. You got to fire this guy. You got to let me and Howie do this. Is Sirianni going to consent to that? Mm-hmm. How much bleep, so to speak, would he have to eat to stay as the head coach? Yeah. And would he be willing to do that? Yeah. There's a lot of stuff in flux here and in play, and it's really fascinating to see how it's all going to shake out. Because let me say this. I really do think this is a crossroads for the Eagles, a huge crossroads, because of the decisions that Lurie is going to have to make and what they would mean for the franchise down the road.
I think you're right on. I think your analysis on that could not be
laid it out perfectly, quite honestly.
Yeah, and the last one is really the Doug scenario. Doug had at least thought he had some gravitas from winning a Super Bowl to say, I want this guy. I want that guy. I should have that right to say, I've played along. I've been the good soldier. Now I want some say. And he was shown the door. I don't know that Nick has that same kind of gravitas that Doug had, but I want to go back to something else. This is to your point. Jeffrey Lurie's never hired a head coach with head coaching experience in the NFL. It's been Ray Rhodes. It's been Andy Reid. It's been Chip Kelly. It's been Doug Peterson. It's been Nick Sirianni. Every single one of those guys were either assistants at the NFL level or, in Chip's case, a head coach at the college level. It would be completely out of character. Now, I don't know that we've had an array of guys like this available, but you're right. Like, what is he willing to cede some say? Is Howie willing to cede that say? And if that's the case, you're right. Like, you're bouncing Sirianni to bring in, no disrespect, Dave Canales or somebody like that who was a well thought of assistant. But like, I don't know, man. There's a million questions here.
Well, Rob, here's the thing, right? And Mike, you can definitely key in on this. And Mike, you laid it out. It's almost as if you do decide to fire Sirianni, you're gambling, because at the end of the day, if you don't hire one of those power forward guys that we're talking about, like you said, Harbaugh, Belichick, Vrabel, or Pete Carroll, if you don't hire one of those power forward guys, any hire that you do make after Sirianni is going to be called into question. And also, how do you sell it to your players? And this is something I'm curious about with you, because we put a lot of accountability on Sirianni's plate, but I'm also curious, how do you balance player accountability as well? Because me personally, I've been going back and forth between two competing ideas. These players are professionals. They get paid millions of dollars. How can you not wake up for a playoff game or wake up for games that matter to your division standing or your conference standing? How can you not be motivated or get up for that? And then I battle it with, okay, Nick Sirianni, what aren't you doing to get your guys ready? How do you balance those two competing ideas of player accountability and coaching accountability?
I think there needs to be, I don't know what Nick is doing behind the scenes and what he's saying to these guys to hold them accountable. I will say this: the most visible and important player on that roster needs a lesson in it. And I like Jalen Hurts. I'm a Jalen Hurts guy. I think he's been terrific. I think he's a great story. But I've been disappointed, and I've lost some respect for Jalen Hurts in the way he handled the two opportunities he had to take some accountability and back up a head coach who, for all his faults and flaws, has backed Jalen publicly at every turn. Okay? After the Seattle game, when Hurts and A.J. Brown called that audible at the end of the game, and Hurts threw that deep pass to Brown that was intercepted, Nick Sirianni twisted himself into a pretzel, offering explanations that didn't make any sense about trying to draw a pass interference penalty, and never once let on that it was Hurts and Brown who made that call, who made the audible there. And it was only a week or two later when A.J. Brown stepped forward and said, hey, I appreciate that Nick said that. I'll give you an example of why I like Nick and respect Nick. He took the bullet for us in that situation. Jalen and I called that play. And Jalen was asked about it and didn't answer the question. Jalen had an opportunity to do the same thing and didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't back his coach. And then after the game Monday night, after the loss in Tampa Bay, when my colleague Jeff McClain asked Hurts point blank, do you want Nick Sirianni back as your head coach? And Jalen's answer was so glib. I didn't know he was going anywhere.
Yeah. And then he had an opportunity again, Mike, because it was followed up, and he still didn't. Basically, I have faith in the whole staff. Like, no, they're asking you specifically about your head coach, and I'll just pick up on that.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. Just that begs the question. Does Hurts believe Sirianni is the guy that can get him to the promised land or get him over the top? Does he believe Sirianni is the guy that can take his game to another level? And I think that's what it boils down to. And I think that's why he didn't jump out the window for him.
No, I think that's 100% right. And I think that's going to be the ultimate determining factor of Sirianni's future here. And it doesn't look good for him in that regard. As I just said, Jeffrey Lurie is going to look at this. He has invested $250 million into Jalen Hurts. If Nick Sirianni isn't getting the most out of Jalen Hurts that Jeffrey Lurie thinks he should be getting out of him, and if Jalen Hurts doesn't think Nick Sirianni is the guy, then Jeffrey Lurie is going to fire Nick Sirianni and bring in somebody who he thinks can get the most out of Jalen Hurts. That's my point about watching the quarterback as opposed to the head coach.
It's the old adage, you can't fire the players. But
right.
And one other example, Mike, just on your not backing your coach thing. Look, Dak Prescott had about as miserable a game against Green Bay as you could have. I mean, it was every here we go again, Dak Prescott thing, right? And everybody dogpiled him after it happened. He's asked about Mike McCarthy, and he went on a soliloquy. He said, this guy is the reason I had the best career year that I had.
Great point, Rob. Great point.
If you're going to blame somebody, blame me, he said. He said that this offense operates because of Mike McCarthy. That's why we're as good as we are, because of him. It's not him. It's us. Like, that's, to me, that's leadership.
Yep.
I'm okay with Jalen being super cliche guy, and he's trained by his dad and Nick Saban not to eat the rat poison and all that. I appreciate that. I respect that, in fact. But he knew what he was doing there when he was asked about Sirianni. So to Tone's point, that to me said, I don't believe in this. And that could doom Sirianni likely today or whenever this happens.
Yeah, the other factor we haven't mentioned here, Rob, and it gets back to, I think, what you had said about the difference between Sirianni and Doug. Doug was very much a go-along to get-along guy, personality-wise. He's an accommodating guy. His natural instinct is to help you, help his players, help you in the media. He wanted to answer your questions, right?
Yeah.
Nick can be like that, but I think Nick is his hot-blooded kind of way of carrying himself. On the one hand, it doesn't serve him well, I think, and he really needs to mature in the public image he presents during a game, after a game. He lets that kind of arrogance seep out from time to time, and I wonder how much of that might seep out in a meeting with Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman, where he might be more likely to say, "No, I'm not doing that. Yeah, I'm not doing it." I don't know. I mean, we're all speculating here, and we'll get the answers eventually. But man, it's going to be really, really interesting to see how this all shakes out.
Yeah, and here's the thing, Mike. The reality is the Eagles have been playing with borrowed time over the past couple seasons. Jason Kelce, a guy who's been going back and forth between retirement. Brandon Graham, you don't know what his future is with the Eagles. Fletcher Cox, he's over the past 2 or 3 seasons, we've just been trying to figure out, he's been on 1-year deals for the past 2 or 3 years. And then you just think about how they have been trying so hard to keep this window open. And they have many free agents coming up, a lot of big contracts that they got to figure out with Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat next season, Avonte Maddox. They have so many decisions looming over the next couple of years. They can't afford to have to worry about the coaching situation as well. So, I'm curious from your perspective, right? When you think about the front office moves that are looming this offseason, and then you throw in the coaching issues, where does this team go from here? How far have they fallen?
It's a great question, Tone. I think you have to think of every NFL season in a way as its own self-contained entity. That what happened the year before is not necessarily going to carry over to the following year, and so on and so on. So they do have some serious decisions to make. And the only way that they're going to keep this thing going is if they draft well. And there's some open questions about that, right? Like Jordan Davis didn't become a dominant defensive lineman this season. Jalen Carter sloughed off at the end of the year. You're not going to have Jason Kelce and Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox and Lane Johnson as these mainstays who were still making big plays for you in their 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th seasons. I mean, at times out there, it looked like Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox were still their 2 best defensive linemen.
True.
Which doesn't say much about who they've drafted behind those guys.
Nolan Smith was a first rounder. I mean, he gave him nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing this year.
Yeah, and I was saying this to somebody earlier today. It's all fine and good, and it can even work out from time to time if you do nothing but draft guys from Georgia and Alabama. Okay? But guys from Georgia and Alabama, in the main, in general, are probably a little less likely to have encountered the kind of adversity in their careers.
AKA losing. Yep.
Yeah, that a guy like a Fletcher Cox did at Mississippi State, or that a guy like a Brandon Graham had to learn to deal with early in his career when he was labeled a bust, or that Jason Kelce, who was a walk-on at Cincinnati, had to deal with as being a guy who was counted out and was a 6th-round pick. I'm not saying you don't just draft talented guys, but I am saying that there was an intangible quality that core 4, and you throw Lane Johnson in there as well, brought to the culture of the team that is harder for them to bring once they're older, and it has to be sustained. And it might be a little harder to be sustained if you're bringing in blue chip guys all over the place. I know that sounds kind of intangible, and you're not really able to grab it, but I think that sort of thing does matter in the culture of an NFL locker room.
Yeah, and look, Mike, I think there's, like anything, when you fall apart like this, there's a lot of ways to go with it. How much culpability, and forget the not having the coaches back for a minute, but does Jalen wear in this with just the way that he's played? I want to get into, I know you talked about what a fan you were of his, but I don't think he was given the proper tools during the week against opponents, but there's also times where I'm not blaming Brian Johnson or Nick that he makes, a bad throw or he fumbles. I mean, he was a turnover machine. They were horrendous situationally, including him. I mean, the safety he took Monday night is still beyond comprehension. And we saw a couple of those kind of moments, from him during the season. Is it as simple as it's not linear? You're not going to always be climbing. Like what do you think happened with him this year on the field?
I think the upheaval in the coaching staff had a lot to do with it. I think back to the Donovan McNabb years early in his time, and you could see the linear progression that Donovan made year after year after year. And that was because he had Andy with him, and he had a really strong group of assistants. And when one of them would leave, like a Brad Childress, Andy would bring in somebody else who was pretty darn smart. But Andy was there the whole time. What I want to see from Jalen is him getting to the point that Donovan got at the end of the 2003 season and into the 2004 season, where he didn't need to run to beat you. Go back and watch Donovan in the second half of that 03 season after his injured thumb heals and he's back to being 100% healthy. And then watch him that entire 04 season with T.O. and Westbrook and all the weapons they had. He didn't need to run to just have a great game and pick you apart. I mean, the longer we get away from his time and with the Eagles, the better he looks to me. I go back and watch his tape and his games. It's like, wow. People forget how good Donovan was. And I think that to me was the concerning thing this season with Jalen was there were times he was beating teams from the pocket. He did it to the Commanders in Washington and, against the Dolphins to a degree. But you didn't see that consistently. And so I think that's a question the Eagles have to answer. Can we find another Steichen-like guy to come in here and create an offense and create surroundings that allow Jalen to thrive from the pocket. And then we'll find out if what happened this season was just about the coaching or whether Jalen, maybe isn't going to be that kind of guy. Maybe he does need to run to be at his best. And as he gets older, that could be an issue.
Mike, last one for me. It's kind of a two-parter here. One, do you believe they paid him too soon? And two, how involved do you think he will be with the future? How involved do you think he will be in the discussions when it comes to Nick Sirianni's future or the potential next head coach for the Eagles?
It's hard to say that they paid him too soon, Tone, because if he goes out and has a great season this year, meaning the season that just ended, then the price tag goes up. And who knows how he's going to react to the Eagles not paying him right away. I think he's at the center of this whole thing. I think he is at top of mind for the decisions that Jeffrey Lurie has to make as this franchise moves forward, because you've shelled out, as I said, $255 million to him. Jeffrey Lurie wants to make sure he gets the most return possible that he can on that investment. So are they going to be consulting Jalen? I don't know about that, but his future and maximizing him, that's going to be something that Jeffrey Lurie is really, really thinking about and taking into consideration when he decides who the next coach will be.
All right, Mike, last one from me, and this is back to Kelce for a minute. And again, he has said he hasn't made a decision yet. Okay, that's Jason's words from his podcast. If in fact he does hang him up, I think he's as unique a Philadelphia story as we've seen. 6th round pick, he's a center. It's usually not a glamour position where the fans fall in love with you. You don't see a lot of 60, other than Chuck Bednarik,
right?
Number 60 of anybody walking around. But he has taken on sort of the face of the organization. Is there a comp for him in terms of great play and impact off the field? I mean, he's done so much for the Eagles autism research, and just like a dude, he's arm wrestling at, the bar, on a Wednesday, like just unique guy.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the Flyers of the 70s with Clark and Perron and Bill Barber and the Bullies and those guys being part of the community. But sports have gotten so big now, and the NFL has gotten so big, that I think it is hard to find a comp for Jason because he is so accessible and he is such a man of the people. And as you said, Rob, he's a center. And I do think the way that he played the position, the fact that he was the focal point of so much film breakdown. When you watched an Eagles game, you would always have Aikman or Greg Olson or Charles Davis pointing out, look at how Kelce gets downfield and throws that block, and he's the most athletic center we've ever seen. And then look, let's be very honest here, guys. Everything changed for him when he put that mummer's costume on and delivered that speech. I mean, let's.
Yeah, it did.
That's it, right? Like the fact that he showed that he was paying attention to all the scuttlebutt, right? That he went through all the names. Howie Roseman, Doug Peterson, Nick Foles, blah, blah, blah. Like that he went down the list of people who the media and other fan bases had called out. It showed that he looked at the sport in a very similar way to those of us who cover it and follow it, look at it. And that kind of intensified the legend, I think.
Yeah. That's great note to go out on. Mike, appreciate it. What's next? What can we
wish we had more time, Mike. Wish we had more time, man.
I appreciate that.
Now, man.
Yeah, appreciate that, guy. I'm getting out of here. I'm going to head down to clean out day at the Eagles. Okay. I got some time off coming up to me, so I can keep working on the book I'm writing now.
And tell everybody what the next book's going to be.
Next book is the title is Magic in the Air, and it is all about the myth, mystery, and soul of the slam dunk. Every chapter is kind of its own self-contained book about an aspect or an athlete who was tied to the slam dunk. Dr. J, Wilton, Russell. I'm writing a chapter right now about the guy who won the first NBA dunk contest, Darnell Hillman. His nickname was Dr. Dunk, and he played for the Pacers in the 70s. Really cool story.
Awesome. All right, looking forward to it. Mike, appreciate it, man. Thanks as always for your time, and we'll talk to you soon, man.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, that is Mike Sielski of the Inquirer, WIP as well.
Great conversation, Rob. I really wish we had more time to really, because I feel like the way he ironed out the whole dynamic between Lori, Howie, Nick, Jalen, Jalen not jumping out the window for Nick, and Nick constantly falling on the sword for everybody else. It's this is going to be a very interesting next few days, Rob, because it's going to tell us everything about where this organization is going.
Thank you.
This is one of our better interviews you got.
Yeah, and
I appreciate this.
We're gonna keep it rolling. Jeff Kerr is going to join us at 1 o'clock, Tone. So about an hour from now, he will be he's en route right now.
You know Jeff's gonna bring the heat, right?
Oh, listen, man, I'm going to give you some numbers that he threw out last night on Twitter that are like, you're going to take a step back and whoa, okay. Jeff always has some killer stuff, so we will talk to him. And again, always fun with Mike Sielski. All right, let's get a quickie in. Tone, it's your time to shine, brother. We're going to do your segment when we get back.
Let's do it.
Looking forward to tell everybody what it is again before we.
So basically, we're doing something called come back or go home. Right. We're going to discuss players that we would love to have come back, and we're going to ignore some rules here. We're going to ignore some contracts. We're going to ignore some, we're going to ignore who's going to be a free agent, who's not. We're just going to go flat out. Who do you want back? Who don't you want back? Right. Okay. Did we overvalue or undervalue this guy? We're going to kind of try to work through position by position and really figure out, where they need to clean house, where they're pretty solid at. It's going to be a fulfilling segment, you guys. Trust me.
Perfect. All right, let's hit it and let's come back and do that again. 1 o'clock. Jeff Kerr will be joining us. We'll do our NFL segment. We got tons in store for you. We will work some Sixers in too. By the way, big game again from the big man. All right, knowing who to trust with your finances, right, can be very scary. Can be a real challenge. I found the right person, and I want you to have that right person as well that you can trust. That's Jim Murray and Principal Financial Group. Whether it's retirement planning, 401k review, insurance review, you might have a small business, you need help with your employee benefits. That's another resource that Jim can help you with. I've entrusted my IRA, my 401k rollovers with Jim, and I couldn't be any happier. You will be as well. Give him a call, 610-996-4751, 610-996-4751, or you could email him, Murray, Murray.Jim@principal.com, Murray.Jim@principal.com.